Welcome to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. As always, I am your host, Nina Mueller, and this is the place where you get your dose of upfront and honest conversations with people from all around the world. Enjoy the show. Stephanie Horwitz, or Steph, from the What Should I Do With My Life podcast, is joining us today from Tel Aviv in Israel. Steph will tell us that we might have been misled, since many people are figuring out that a career might not follow a one-and-done recipe. Steph and I will be discussing how different people have mastered their career, what you can do to get recognition on the job, and how you can advocate for your work. We will also talk about the fact that women are often so easily overlooked in the workplace, and we'll get into sharing our opinions on why passion matters, how you find self-definition outside of your job, and we'll get into what privilege has to do with choosing your own path. Now, let's hear it directly from the wonderful Steph. Hi, Steph. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me, fellow podcaster.
My absolute pleasure. So please tell me a bit about yourself first off.
Well, I am Steph or Stephanie. I live in Tel Aviv. I'm 31 years old. I am the host and creator of the What Should I Do With My Life podcast. I'm a storyteller. I'm a connector. I've been working in the tech world the past 4 years, most recently doing global value creation for an enterprise software company. And I'm in an interesting time right now, Nina. So I'll just start with that. Yeah, I am figuring out my stuff as I tend to do.
Well, that sounds interesting. So what is your podcast really all about? Can you tell us a bit more?
Of course. Well, as the name suggests, what should I do with my life? The goal is really to normalize the fact that none of us know what the hell we're doing, and it's okay. There's no one right career path or career move. We need to stop this pressure and expectation of ourselves, of each other, from our families to have these shiny, perfect careers. And of course, if you're privileged and lucky enough to create a career and do the stuff you want to do, as opposed to, sometimes we have to work jobs because we have to work jobs and we have to pay the bills. The goal is to normalize and create a community around people who are trying to figure it out. And the episodes are interviewing different folks. Some are entrepreneurs, some have made career pivots, different backgrounds, different experiences, and to hear about their stories and their challenges and their squiggly paths and their advice, basically, for the rest of us trying to figure it out.
So how did you come to start your podcast? Was it because of personal struggles, sort of job-wise?
This struggle is just always a constant for me. This is the ongoing struggle. And you know what? I guess what's comforting is I'm not alone in it, because I'm hearing people tell me every day, it doesn't matter if they're 40 years old or 25, what should I do with my life? People literally ask me that, and it's universal, really. It started off during COVID. I wanted a podcast. I thought about it. People said, you should have a podcast. And I was like, what the hell am I going to talk about? And what's interesting? And what do people want to hear? And I'm kind of in this startup-y tech world in Tel Aviv. There are so many podcasts on that note. And I was like, what would I have to differentiate or give more / I don't even want to do that. What's top of mind for me? Not knowing what the hell I'm doing. And I thought about my friend Ronnie, who had just retired. He had a men's clothing store and he worked the same job, basically. He had his store until he retired. And I love Ronnie. He's the best. And I'm like, should I go into retail? Like, I need to talk to Ronnie and hear more about his story and hear it. And, while I'm at that, I should talk to my dad. My dad was about to retire. He went from paper boy to newspaper publisher. I should talk to these people. And at the time, I didn't know if it was going to be, something just for the family, a YouTube video, a podcast. Nina, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. My first interview was with my dad. I didn't know what it was going to be, if it would be a podcast, if it would just be this recorded conversation. But alas, it was born, and I thought it would be a joke. Like, what if I call it, what should I do with my life? Like, what if the whole concept and shtick is how none of us know what we're doing? And that's what it is.
Yeah, I think that's a really great motivation to really start anything is by trying to help people or, spread more awareness, I guess. Because if you do normalize that a lot of people or the majority of people don't really know what they're doing, then it's less of a struggle personally or for the individual, right?
Definitely. And for people who know me and have either worked with me or my friends or acquaintances, like people know that I'm very open about this topic and this stuff. And I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what the heck's going on. I don't know what I'm doing. And I think just normalizing it and making it okay. And it's something we should talk about because a lot of people are thinking it and we need to be real about it. And I think like talking to these amazing people who on the surface or on paper or on LinkedIn seem perfect and the perfect career journey and have their shit together, they don't. And they'll admit they don't. And they'll admit that they're figuring out. That's the best part.
So do you feel like there is a difference in generations here? Because to me, it does seem like there are people that do have more opportunities and there's more of a sort of broad spectrum of career paths that people can go into nowadays. And as you mentioned, your friend who had been in the same store for his entire career, I'm assuming. Do you think
Yeah.
that with like generations that has changed?
Oh, for sure. I feel like that's a good point. Absolutely. I feel like our parents' generation, it was just how it was done that you kind of have this consistent job. And even my dad was many, many years. I don't want to butcher it, but he was like 30 something years in the same job, and running a newspaper.
Mm,
And it's definitely generational. I think our generation is known for hopping around, bopping around. I think it used to be negatively looked at, and now it's kind of just assumed that us and our peers are going to bop around and make pivots. And it's definitely more normalized and accepted. And,
mhm.
maybe 5 or 10 years ago, you'd see someone with lots of jumps on their resume and be like, oh, no, 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 that doesn't look good. And I think it's, again, depends on the profession, right? And, what field you're in, but
Sure.
absolutely, absolutely generational. And you have to wonder, right? Like, for our parents and for our friends who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s, like what if they were given that flexibility or it was okay or society said it was okay? Like what would
Mhm.
they be doing? Like would my dad have a different career? Would yours, like who knows?
Do you find that your guests have sort of a commonality in their answers to the overall questions of your podcast and how they figured out for themselves or how they haven't figured it out?
Yes, I love that. And yes, and that's why I believe in it and I love it so much because every time I talk to someone different who has a totally different experience and track record, and generally these people are, however you look at it, very successful and accomplished in what they do. And they will generally admit that they don't know what they are doing or they didn't mean to get here. Maybe it just happened. It was by chance that their path wasn't straight. They didn't necessarily have these grand career plans or 10-year plan or something like that. A lot of them are doing something they didn't think they would be doing. They're surprised by it. So there's like this general theme of try new things, listen to your intuition. There's no wrong move or wrong thing to do because ultimately it will get you to where you need to be. And I think that's a general theme that it's just squiggly lines, figuring it out one day at a time. And a lot of these people don't, a lot of these guests feel they have more chapters ahead and they don't even know what those will look like. And I think that's really encouraging, for us who
Mhm.
feel lost or like, what am I doing or what should I do?
It's funny because you bring up the probably the most interesting but also most difficult question at interviews that I've experienced was when I was asked, "What is your 5-year plan or your 10-year plan?" And I was
Oh,
sitting there and I was like, well, I don't know." you know,
yes.
I find that question a bit. a bit weird nowadays almost because obviously for an employer, I do understand that you want some stability, I guess, to your staff. But then, yeah, I don't know whether that's really commendable for somebody to have a straight path in that way.
I like that you said that because I feel similarly. I don't have an answer for that at all. That question would terrify me. It overwhelms me. At the same time, do I wish I had more clarity? I do. I'm not saying I wish I had the 5-year plan laid out, but I wish
Mm-hmm.
and I think I have some pointers, and with time and experience, you kind of have these ideas of where you want to go. It wouldn't be outlined in a 5-year clean plan, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something to be said and an importance to think about what you would like to be doing ideally, just so you can start working in that direction. And I think when you try new things, that's the best thing you can do to see what you like and what you don't like, and to get you closer to doing what you actually want to do ultimately.
Mm. Is there a difference that you noticed between genders on how they have found their path or how they haven't found their path? Or is it not so much gender based, do you think?
That's a really interesting question. Honestly, I don't think so. About 2/3 of my guests have been women. So I have spoken with more women than men, but this is making me think and wanting to look back. I don't think it's a gender thing. I really feel like it's an individualistic thing, and it comes down to that person. And some people have had moments, these like Oprah aha moments of, oh, this is what I should do, or oh, the first time I saw this IBM computer, I knew I wanted to work in innovation. That was one of my guests named Samar. Not everyone has that aha moment. Other people just fall into it, like someone named Liat, who was a lawyer. She started doing a different job, and then she was baking cakes for her kids' birthdays, and then people asked her to make cakes for their kids' birthdays, and before you know it, she literally has 2 very successful cake businesses. She didn't mean for it to happen. So I think it's very individual. That's an interesting question. I'd be curious to look more into it myself and listen to what my guests have said.
You actually just brought up an interesting point, I think, when you said about your guest who went into baking cakes. I think if we're talking binary genders, I think if it was a man doing that, it would be much more questionable to a majority of society, I guess, to, sort of be thrown off a little by that choice. Whereas if it's a woman, I think those kind of professions are much more accepted. Would you agree with that?
That's interesting. I I feel like these pivots are very welcomed. I feel like people are getting really good responses for doing shit they're good at that comes naturally, that's bringing value to other people. So that's interesting to bring up. And that's a very specific situation. I'm just thinking like of another guest, my most recent guest, Joseph, who was a lawyer, and then ultimately he pivoted into more biz devy sales, and then he pivoted into starting a nonprofit organization here. So that is a bit different, but I feel like when people see other people pivot and thrive, there's definitely the skeptics and the people who are like, what the fuck are you doing? You left your stable job, you left the comforts, you left this respected profession to do whatever. Like, you're going to have the haters and you're going to have the doubters, but I think there's a lot of respect as well for the people who take that leap.
Well, I'm actually really glad to hear that because I do think our generation is doing, and the younger generation even, is doing a much better job at like accepting people for just who they are, really,
Yeah.
than it was before. I believe our parents are like their generation was still quite a lot different, even though they're not that old, so to speak.
Yeah, I think so too. And you know what that makes me think of on those lines is, again, if you have the comfort and privilege to be able to choose your career and the kind of work you do, I feel like our generation is really being encouraged to find out what you're good at, find out what your skills, your gifts, whatever are, and see how you can make money from that. And just that concept alone, I think, is helping us be more authentic in how we show up at work and how we're accepted by others. Like, we're more accepted because we're being more of ourselves if we're kind of taking that approach. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And do you also agree with our generation and younger or around our age, sort of people being more accepting of or more believing of the fact that work isn't what defines you as a person necessarily?
Ooh. Yee. Woo. So it's so funny. This is very interesting because what you just said, is like the biggest conundrum ever. One of
Mm,
them for me, feeling like my work should be my worth. My work is what defines me. And I think there are a lot of different things that define me. For whatever reason, I have this immense pressure that it should be my job and my work that is like the biggest thing I can contribute to the world, to society, to others. That's a big thing that I'm personally working through and hashing through. And on the one hand, I think back to before the internet and people could go to their jobs and then they go home and that's it. And they're not on LinkedIn and there's no social media. And also there's no computer they're taking home where they can keep working afterward. So on the one hand, I see that coupled with today, whereas our work follows us because we're working remote, we're working overtime, we're taking our computers home. There's social media and LinkedIn, and it's really interesting to tease out because, like, I feel like our work is defining us more to a degree because our work can access us more, if that makes sense.
mhm.
Um, but Nina, I don't know. I don't
Oh, that's
know.
totally fine. That's totally fine. We don't have to have an answer for
I
everything.
Well, here's where it gets tricky. Like what I said before about this concept of what I'm being told, I feel, is find what you're good at, find what you like and get paid for it. Well, then that's kind of making yourself intertwined in your work. If you're a
Mhm,
self-branded business doing whatever and it's you're essentially the product. You are your work to a degree and your work is
mhm,
you. And we're seeing a lot of that. Like so many, entrepreneurs and self-branded business owners and it's so tricky and I think it's really hard to tease out. And I think it's really important to have a balance. And what I've learned through talking to people and from the podcast is it ebbs and flows. And sometimes your work's going to take over and sometimes it's not. And there are other parts of your life that will be in the forefront. Like I would like a happy balance. And on a personal level, I wish I didn't feel this gut feeling of wanting my work to somehow define me, but it does.
mm. On the Minimalists podcast, I heard a really interesting episode where they spoke about, how at a party or an event or whatever occasion, people usually, one of the first questions they ask is, "What do you do?" And what
Yeah.
they actually mean is, "What do you do for a living?" So how do
Yes.
you make money to survive? But
Yes.
what they really do is, and I kind of agree with that statement, really, even though I do sometimes ask that myself. I do ask people, "So what do you do as a profession?" But maybe I just rephrase it a bit instead of "What do you do?" You know. Um,
Yes.
but
Yes.
yeah, I do find that like their statement is kind of what one of them said is kind of true, where it is only asked to like categorize the person into what kind of level of wealth and ambition and accomplishment they sort of go into. And that's kind of sad as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it's that. I think there is a genuine curiosity of like just understanding what does this person work in, like where are their passions, where are their interests, which is not conflicting necessarily with what you just said. And it's so funny because I was just thinking for myself, like when I'm meeting new people, I think asked more like, how do you spend your days? What are you up to? Like being a bit more mindful of that. But what I have to say is in the podcast, I start off in one sentence, what do you do? That's what I ask people. And it's up for interpretation because some people will say, in my life, in my work, and I'll say, however you want to tell me. But it's a really good point because I think when I'm asking that question in the pod, I'm curious to hear what they're going to say. Like, are they going to say, I'm a banker? Or are they going to say, I'm a dad who loves fishing and I also work at a bank? But maybe I
More
should
about them as a
rephrase
person.
it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. The minimalists said they suggested that instead of what do you do or what do you do for a living, we should ask, what are you passionate about? And I thought that was kind of a very intriguing way of changing the narrative of the whole conversation around that, and also changing the narrative around what defines or makes up a person. And
Yeah.
I actually started asking people that, usually more in my private life, less on the podcast. And people don't really seem to be able to handle that question. They're not
Mm,
really prepared for it. They don't really
yeah.
know what to answer, what they're passionate about, which is, yeah, surprising, kind of.
It's, you know what? This is interesting. This is really interesting because by making this change, you're trying to like ease off the pressure of your professional life. And when asking about passions, that's also can be a stressor actually. And things we talk about that a lot on the podcast too. Like, people will say, do what you're passionate about. And it's like, well, I don't know what I'm passionate about. Or how do I find my passion? I think that's a big topic as well on the pod in general. So I see people being overwhelmed by that question, even though the intentions are good and supposed to broaden, make it like I totally understand why that's a better thing to ask. And then as someone who's also like, what am I passionate about? Whatever. Like, oi, it's very interesting. It's very interesting.
And it's also interesting, I find that you said you don't really know what else you would be contributing. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but what else you would be contributing if not for the majority of your time being spent at your job. But I find, for example, and you don't define yourself as a full-time podcaster, do you?
No.
And I would probably assume your podcast contributes a lot more to increased awareness, societal changes, and I don't know, societal evolution, if you want to call it that, than being in a high-tech job or something.
Yeah, you're accurate, I think.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. For sure. You're absolutely right. And it's a mindset shift. And, it's how well we know ourselves, how we want to show up in the world. Is it being a good friend? Can I put value on being a good friend? Are you someone who's good at keeping in touch? Are you someone who likes to bake and bring other people things? All the things you are that have absolutely nothing to do with your profession and other ways you can
Mhm.
make an impact positively for people.
Do you personally believe that your job should be about your passion, or are these preferably two separate entities?
Boom, boom, boom. I,
Yeah, I'm always handing out the easy questions here.
I think it depends on the person. There are people who are able to do the work, not be passionate about it, have some interest in it, do the work, be somewhat engaged, and that's it. And then there are people who really want to be passionate about what they're doing and how they're spending their time. And if you're working 8, 9, 10 hours a day, for me personally, I want to be passionate about what I'm doing. I want it. That's what I want. I want to spend my days being super passionate about what I'm doing. I wish I could change my brain so I could be okay just doing the job and find my passions elsewhere, because I've gotten that advice. And a lot of people say that. Do the job, get the good benefits, looks good on your resume, stable, whatever. And then your passions you could do on the weekend, you can do in the evening, you could do as a side project. I think it depends really on the person and what's enough for them, because if you're in the situation where you're not passionate about what you're doing and you really want to be, it's just not going to work. You're going to be misaligned with what you're doing and you're going to feel tension. And I've experienced this firsthand, so I know what it's like. I think it's just based on the person. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I guess it is also like a sort of a conversation, as you said before, of privilege to some
Yeah.
degree, really. Some
Yes.
people simply don't have the means in terms of education or whatever. Because some colleges do require people to be quite wealthy or go into extreme debt, which is also not very recommendable, I guess. I would personally say. So it is kind of a very privileged sort of topic to
Yes.
talk about generally, which I agree with you completely on.
Yes.
But if you can find something that you're passionate about and that gives you the means for making a life
Yes.
that you like to lead, then that's great. Yeah, and
Agreed.
otherwise, if you do have a job that provides you with good financial means, maybe to, I don't know, support your family or support your podcast, which is, I don't know, your way of contributing something in whatever way, shape, or form, or not, maybe not a podcast, but you know what I mean, like sort
Yeah,
of a side gig that you're not really being paid for or very little, but you're really like passionate about, then that's also a way to live by, I think.
for sure. I couldn't agree with you more. I really agree with that. I think it's
Mm.
the ideal. I think it's the ideal that if you're lucky, you can have that. And if you're lucky that the passion translates to something you can do to make a living, yes, agreed.
Mm. In some countries, you have to decide pretty early on what kind of career path you want to pursue. What do you think helps people most with finding a suitable career path or where to start
Ooh,
out on, sort of?
yeah.
Because you can always change, right? I mean, we're in this generation now where we're more accepting of people and
Yes.
probably more respectful of people changing career paths as well.
For sure. I agree. There's definitely more flexibility now. I think for someone who's starting off and trying to choose a career path, there's definitely some introspection and, quiet time you have to have with yourself to understand what you want, what's important to you, what are you good at, and what do you enjoy. And what you're good at isn't always what you enjoy. But, sometimes naturally, if you're good at something, you might enjoy it more because it comes easier to you. Some people would recommend on the show have said, think about what comes easy to you that doesn't come easy to others. So, first and foremost, I think the first step is this like self reflection period. Second of all, I think it's super helpful to talk to lots of different people. If you're not sure, you need to start talking to people and asking them questions about their day to day, meeting with people. You're also building your network in parallel while you do that, which is excellent. If you can forego making a decision, when I went to college, you declared your major, I think, sophomore year. So freshman year, you're taking a bunch of different classes, trying to figure it out. Sophomore year, you're kind of declaring a major. And again, at this rate, unless it's like vocational, then it's
Mhm.
very specific to a certain job. A lot of people are anthropology majors and they're currently marketing and high tech, or who knows. You can definitely do something different than what you study, but spending the time with yourself, and I really believe spending the time with other people in different areas to get a feel. And if you have the flexibility to try new things, try the internships, do the summer program here, work a job during school, so you in a different field, for example, just to try it out. Like, I would just definitely encourage exploration in general, not being afraid to try. Now's the time.
I think it's quite a human conundrum, really, to have expectations, which you've touched on earlier, even though they are rarely helpful. How do you deal with expectations you have for yourself or for the work that you do, either in your work life or your podcast or private life?
This is hard because I am a people pleaser
Mm.
and I have been working very hard on it. I've gotten a lot better, but I'm still a people pleaser and I care a lot what people think of me and my work. And naturally, as most of us are, I am my own harshest critic. So I am the nastiest to myself, like a lot of us are, things we would say about ourselves or things we've done, we would never say to a friend or a loved one. So I think a lot of the expectations are on myself. And I think it is a lot of mental work and mind games. For me, it's also working with the therapist. Also, when I said mind games, I think I meant more mental exercises and reframing. What are my expectations here? Like, should I be putting this much pressure on myself? Is it worth it? Is everyone care as much as I do about this? Does no one care and I'm the only one who cares? I can't carry this project alone. It's taking a step back, stepping out of yourself for a minute and looking at the bigger picture to understand, should I have these crazy high expectations of myself? Does anyone else have them of me? Am I just being hard on myself? It's removing yourself from the situation, and you need to make space and quiet to be able to deal with that and see it when it's happening. I think it's just really easy to not even think about that because you're used to just working on autopilot or doing things as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess probably one of the better practices, if you can practice that, is if you're really thinking of only being accountable to yourself. Because in the end, I think a lot of people kind of mistake, and I'm not free from thinking about like what people expect of me and how something is perceived on the outside. But I think a lot of us tend to forget that people are also dealing with a lot of stuff in their own life and they don't
Yes.
really have that much time to think about stuff that we do, but
Yeah.
rather on themselves.
So true. It's the spotlight effect, and it's us
Mm-hmm.
thinking everyone's watching our every moves and what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone is so caught up in their own stuff, in their own life, in their own world. Everyone's dealing with stuff we have no idea about. And absolutely.
And speaking of societal expectations or people around you judging potentially, there's a lot of on social media, I see that quite commonly. Do you believe that there is a truth to the common narrative of fake it until you make it?
Interesting. So I
Because I see that popping up
definitely,
more and more, I feel like.
yeah. So I think fake it till you make it is an important approach. And I've definitely used it in certain situations where I haven't felt confident enough. Maybe I felt underqualified or inexperienced. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I had to pretend I would until I became that. And one of my favorite things that I feel like kind of takes that to another level is the power poses, before a big meeting, before a big talk. If you're nervous, you put your hands on your hips, you take up space. You might not feel like that powerful woman right now, but you're putting your hands on your hips and it is actually making a change in our brains and our attitudes and
Hmm.
giving us that confidence. It will make a difference in that interview, in that speech you're about to give. So I wouldn't say fake it till you make it in terms of like a social media presence and a personal brand and how you present yourself. But I think as an approach to challenges you have ahead of you that you think you can't handle, but you can, it can be an approach you use to overcome it and ultimately show yourself, oh, I can do this.
You know what I find interesting is that you mentioned the power poses because I hear that a lot and I've actually recommended that to friends as well. But interestingly, I've never recommended that to men. I only recommend that to women. And I don't do this consciously, but I feel like women are usually, including myself, we're usually in need of more self affirmation
Yep.
before, I don't know, interviews, whatever it may be, than men are.
Absolutely, a bajillion percent. Unfortunately, I absolutely agree with it. Women have a harder time taking up space. We generally want to be liked, and expressing an opinion or dissenting opinion or speaking up I'm reading this book by Jamie Kern Lima, who's amazing, who created this brand IT Cosmetics. And I think she sold it for like over $1 billion or something crazy. And she said something great in the book. It was, I'd rather be brave. Maybe I'm butchering it. Sorry, Jamie. I'd rather be brave than be liked. And I thought that was really powerful. And I think we have all these reasons why we don't want to speak out. We don't want to take up space. We're not confident in what we're doing. We feel like we have to fight for a seat at the table. We have to justify why we're there. People overlook us. There's a lot of sexism, so I absolutely agree with you.
Whenever I speak to men, they never seem to even, maybe internally there is such a process, but I've never heard spoken of it before. And I don't think it is happening, certainly not as much as in women, where we're also kind of over humble about our skills,
Yes.
and our
Yes.
experience and everything we bring to the table. Whereas men are, yeah, usually more proud in themselves. And if I get a compliment about something that I'm good at or a skill that I have or whatever, I'm usually like, oh, everybody's got their talents. I can rarely just accept it, even though I'm a feminist. But yeah, I think that's a very interesting
It is. And
difference.
It's true. And it comes up with promotions at work, when
Mm-hmm.
it comes up with sharing what you've been doing, even just with your boss, like the stuff you've been working on, that we need to advocate for ourselves, and we need to step up and talk about what we've been doing and our skills, our qualifications, our actions, because no one's going to do it for us. And it's absolutely true that women generally have a much harder time doing those things. And I wish it wasn't the case. It is. We got to work on it. And I think overall we are, but it's absolutely an effort that I see a lot of my friends, girlfriends, female colleagues, peers making and are mindful of, that, oh, I don't want to brag and I don't want to bring attention to myself. And guess what? You literally have to, if you want to grow in the organization, and if you want to get the recognition you deserve. We just have to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. What do you personally pay attention to when you're speaking to yourself in terms of regulating your expectations and all that, and going into a meeting or a discussion with your boss or whatever it may be?
If I had those good tips, I would be utilizing them. It definitely takes me a few like small spirals down the rabbit hole, depending on what it is, before I can get myself together. And I think a lot of it's about control for me, and thinking what's in my control and what's not. What can I do better for next time? Who has the expectations here, and what do I have in me to deliver them? Are my expectations way higher than the actual receiving party, who I'm supposed to be delivering for? So it's really just breaking it down. I mean, it could be talking it out with a friend, it could be writing it down, it could be just sitting with your thoughts for a minute. Like, truly, I always have a podcast. I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm always listening to music. My brain is always buzzing and it's never quiet. And I've really made an effort the past few months to not constantly be listening to stuff, to have quiet, to leave my phone and headphones when I walk the dog, or the first half hour in the morning when I'm having my coffee. So I think the quiet time with your mind, to be able to evaluate these situations and see things for what they really are, instead of how we're pumping them up in our head.
How, if they have changed, have your views changed since you had started your podcast and since you've had all these guests on?
First of all, on a personal level, it helped show me that I can do stuff. I was very overwhelmed starting a podcast. I don't know about you. I was like, how the hell am I going to do this? I don't know what I'm doing. Is anyone going to listen? I literally didn't know what I was doing. So first of all, it just showed me that, yes, I can do things. I can make things happen. It gave me confidence to reach out to people. It gave me the confidence to say, I have a show and I want you on it, and I value your opinion. It gave me confidence as a storyteller and as somewhat of a thought leader. It's like nauseating for me to even say that and say it about myself, but whatever, on this topic. And then just hearing it again and again from all kinds of people who are super successful, killing it in different fields, who have these doubts too that they're overcoming. It just humanizes it. And it makes me, want to share that message with other people to comfort everyone. And I try to internalize it too, that listen, this person who has their shit together and looks like they got it all, they're struggling with XYZ, or they were unsure about XYZ. There's always messages I'm learning. There's always advice I'm writing down, and I'm always going back to it. I really want to make a book with all of the insights and advice from my guests because I think it's really good.
Yeah, and it also gives you sort of a way to see that a lot of things are attainable.
Definitely. I think it should help us get out of our heads and be less anxious and feel more comfortable trying the new thing, taking the risk, not being too hard on ourselves if we don't know what we're doing, or if we're leaving a job or changing a job or trying to figure out the next path. I would say I'm hoping it would take pressure off people, and maybe make them be nicer to themselves and be nicer when it comes to their expectations of themselves. Speaking of expectations.
Well, that's a perfect note to end this on. Thank you so much for doing this, Steph. It was a real pleasure. We will have everything linked to Steph's podcast and her social media and everything along with that in the show notes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Seriously, it's awesome.
Oh, thank you, Steph. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. If you haven't already, give us a follow and join in the conversation on Instagram and Facebook at The Upfront Podcast. Take care and see you next time.